Today's book is called The Moon Book by Gail Gibbons. This is the last book you will hear from this group of books by Gail Gibbons. Based on what you have learned about her, what types of writing and illustrations do you expect to find in this book? This is a nonfiction book. You'll learn some new information about the book. What are some things you already know about the moon? You have learned that Gail Gibbons thinks asking questions is important. What questions do you have about the moon? So let's see if this book answers your questions. The Moon Book by Gail Gibbons. As the sun sets on the end of each day, the sky becomes darker and darker. On many clear nights, our moon shines brightly in the night sky. So what do you think? Why do you think the moon shines brightly in the night sky? Let's keep reading to find out. Our moon is the brightest and biggest light in our night sky. It outshines all the stars and planets which appear as small points of light. Some planets have many moons. Earth has one. A star burns gases that give off heat and light. The sun is a star. A planet reflects sunlight and revolves around the sun. Earth is a planet. Our moon looks big and bright because it is so close to Earth compared to the faraway stars and planets. It is about 238,900 miles away. What did you find out about why the moon is so big and bright to us? Sorry, there's a glare. So you see the Earth, the distance between the Earth and the moon. It's still pretty far from us, but it's closer than anything else. The moon makes no light of its own to shine. It's bright in the night sky because it reflects the sun's light. It is about 1/4 the size of Earth. It is made up of rock and dust. There is no air or sign of life. So the moon is about 2,000 miles in diameter and about 6,800 miles around. Earth is about 8,000 miles in diameter and about 25,000 miles around. Most astronomers and other scientists think our moon formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Some believe something collided with Earth that tossed out a cloud of rock and debris. While orbiting around Earth, the rock and debris came together to form the moon. So astronomers study the planets, their moons, and the stars. So this is just a theory of what could have possibly happened. An orbit is a path of one object around another. In ancient times, people thought the moon was a powerful god or goddess. The Romans called their moon goddess Luna. In Greece, the moon goddess was Selene, who rode through the sky in a silver chariot. Some American Indian nations believed the moon and the sun were brother and sister gods. Stories and legends were told about the shapes and shadows that showed on the moon's surface. Some people said the moon showed a man's face, the man in the moon, who was imprisoned there for stealing. Others told of moon demons living there. The moon is Earth's only natural satellite. It takes about 1 month for the moon to travel around the Earth. A satellite is an object orbiting around a large one. So you see the sunlight is going this way. And the moon, the Earth, and the orbit of the moon going around the Earth. So the moon travels around the Earth, and it is a natural satellite of Earth. How does Gail Gibbons show what she means by that in the picture? How does she show that? The moon makes one complete rotation for each complete trip around Earth. Thus, the same side of the moon is always facing Earth. quite interesting. The moon appears to change shape, but it doesn't. The different shapes we see are called phases of the moon. We are seeing different amounts of light being reflected on the moon. How much light we see depends on the position of Earth, moon, and sun. Phases of the moon. During a new moon, a new moon, the moon is almost directly between the sun and Earth. The moon looks dark. We see no reflected light. Crescent moon. The moon is waxing when the lit surface we see is getting bigger. In a few days, a bit of the sunlit side of the moon shows. It forms a crescent. First quarter moon. When the moon is a quarter of its way around the Earth, it is in its first quarter phase. We see it as half lit. It is sometimes called a half moon. Gibbous moon. When the moon is waxing between a first quarter moon and a full moon, it is called a gibbous moon. About full moon. About 2 weeks have passed since the new moon. Now the entire face of the moon we see shines. A gibbous moon. The moon is waning when the lit surface we see is getting smaller. When the moon is waning between a full moon and a last quarter moon, it is a gibbous moon once again. Last quarter moon. When the moon is 3/4 of its way around the Earth, it is in the last quarter phase. Again, we see it as half lit. It is sometimes called a half moon. Crescent moon. Once again, we see a small sliver of moon shining in the sky. New moon. It takes the moon about 1 month to go through its entire set of phases. People used to know the time of the month by watching the moon phases. So the heading, let's look at the heading. So the heading up here is called Phases of the Moon. This heading names a subtopic, or one part of the main topic, which is the moon. What can you tell about the phases of the moon? So on these pages under this heading, we see information about the phases of the moon from new moon all the way back to a new moon. Solar eclipse. The moon's orbit around Earth is usually tilted slightly compared to Earth's orbit around the sun. Because of this, the moon cannot line up between the sun and Earth. But when the moon's orbit is not tilted, the moon lines up exactly between the sun and Earth. A solar eclipse happens. The moon's shadow falls on Earth. A solar eclipse can last up to 7 and 1/2 minutes. Solar eclipse project. Here's how to make a sun projector to see a picture of a solar eclipse. Poke a pen through the center of a piece of heavy paper that is a little bigger than this book. Stand with your back to the sun. Hold the projector at your shoulder so the sunlight shines through the hole. Hold another piece of heavy paper in your other hand. This is your screen. Move both papers until an image of the eclipse appears on the screen. So that's one way you can see it. Warning, never look directly at the solar eclipse. The sun rays can hurt your eyes. Lunar eclipse. When the sun, earth, and moon are exactly lined up, a lunar eclipse happens. As in a solar eclipse, the moon's orbit is not tilted. The earth blocks off the sunlight that usually lights up the moon. The moon has a reddish glow. Lunar comes from luna, the Latin word for moon. A lunar eclipse can last up to 3 1/2 hours. So an eclipse happens when the light from one object in the sky hides another object in the sky. How are lunar and solar eclipses similar? How are they different? The moon affects the oceans too. The moon's pull, called gravity, on the oceans is strong enough to cause tides. Tides are the daily rising and falling of the ocean's water. A high tide happens about every 13 hours. This is because the moon takes about 25 hours to come back to the same place in the sky it was the night before. Tide differences vary around the world. Low tide happens about every 13 hours. So what do the illustrations tell you about high and low tides? So we have high tide here, and then we have low tide here. What do the illustrations show you? Some night sky gazers and astronomers can get a close-up view of the moon by looking through binoculars. Others look through telescopes. Some huge telescopes are used at observatories. So you have your binoculars, a telescope, and an observatory. A close-up view of the moon's surface shows dark patches astronomers call plains or seas. Other areas are covered with craters, mountains, and valleys. The moon's craters were formed between 3.5 and 4.5 billion years ago when meteors pounded its surface. So you see a mountain here. There's a valley there, a crater. A plain is also called sea. For centuries, people have wanted to know about our moon. In 1959, the Russian spacecraft Luna 3 transmitted to Earth the first pictures of the far side, or back of the moon. There aren't as many dark areas on that side as on the side we see from Earth. So remember, we only see one side of the moon. So they sent a satellite to go see the other side of the moon. So that's the front of the moon that we see, and then there's the back. And then there's Luna 3. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a commitment to put Americans on the moon before the end of the decade. At first, many American unmanned spacecraft were sent. Pictures were taken. The Surveyor 1 landed on the moon in 1966. It sent back information about the moon's surface. The first manned orbit of the moon was made by Apollo 8 astronauts in 1968. So you see Surveyor 1 and then Apollo 8. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin of the Apollo 11 mission became the first men to walk on the moon. There were 4 more Apollo landings on the moon. The last one, Apollo 17, was in 1972. The astronauts did experiments and gathered samples. Astronomers and other scientists were able to learn about the history and nature of our moon. On a clear night when the sun is in the sky, gaze up at it. We are still learning about our closest neighbor, the moon. So why do you think people are curious about the moon? Moon milestones. So about 4,200 years ago, people who lived in Mesopotamia recorded lunar eclipses. About 2,500 years ago, a Greek philosopher, Anaxagoras, believed that the moon's light came from the sun. About 2,200 years ago, a Greek astronomer, Aristarchus, figured a way to measure the distance from the Earth to the moon. Wow. About 2,000 years ago, a Syrian philosopher, Posidonius, explained the effect the moon has on tides. Interesting. In 1609, the Italian scientist Galileo used a telescope to study the sun. In 1645, Hevelius, a Polish pioneer of moon mapping, charted more than 250 formations on the moon. 1850s, the first pictures of the moon were taken by William Bond and J. Whipple in the United States. In 1920s, a French astronomer, Bernard Loic, concluded that the moon's surface was made of dust. 1959, the Russian spacecraft Luna 2 was the first spacecraft to reach the moon. It crash-landed. Luna 3 took pictures of the far side of the moon. Russia's Luna 9 was the first spacecraft to make a soft landing on the moon in 1966. In 1968, the first manned orbit of the moon was made by Apollo 8. July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Moon legends and stories. Egyptians said the moon was the god Osiris who died and came back to life each month. The ancient Chinese believed the goddess Shang-Yi lived forever on the moon. The Chinese eat mooncakes in her honor each year at the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival. The ancient Vikings believed the dark shapes on the moon were of a girl and a boy who were kidnapped while getting a bucket of water. There are European legends that say the full moon can change people into werewolves. Some American Indians believed it was not good to go hunting if the points of the crescent moon were upward. Some people used to think the moon was made of cheese because of the shapes and shadows on the moon's surface. Hey Diddle Diddle, the nursery rhyme, has a famous line, "The cow jumped over the moon." Here's some more moon facts. In Scotland, France, and England, ancient stone circles have been found that line the viewer up with the rising and setting positions of the moon. The temperature on the moon varies greatly. Scientists estimate that it may rise as high as 200 degrees Fahrenheit and fall as low as negative 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Gravity on the moon's surface is about 1/6 of the Earth's gravity. That means if you can leap 5 feet on Earth, you could leap 30 feet if you were on the moon. The largest crater on the moon is 183 miles across. Its name is Bailey. 842 pounds of moon rocks were brought back by Apollo astronauts. The moon travels in its orbit at about 2,200 miles per hour. When there are 2 full moons within the same month, the second full moon is called a blue moon. This happens about every 2 to 2.5 years. The full moon closest to September 21st is called harvest moon. On many clear days, we can see the moon in our daylight sky. So what parts in the moon book helped you answer and think about the questions you had about the book? You have learned quite a few things about the moon. So think about an interesting fact that you learned about the moon from Gail Gibbons. The illustrations by Gail Gibbons help to explain information about the moon. How did they help? Let's look at the last couple pages that we just read, where it says moon milestones, moon legends and stories, and more moon facts. Notice the way that Gail Gibbons has added information about the moon, and she's included some drawings. What do you think about the way she decided to do these pages? What do you think about that?